Welcome in, everybody, to Betting Pros. It's time to place your bets. It is me, Joey P, Joe Pisapia, and I don't know if you know this or not, but there's going to be a game in just about a week and a half's time from now. The Super Bowl, that's right. It is right here waiting for us. The Chiefs and the Eagles. It's going to be a fun game, and of course, it's always more fun when we have some money on the line, and we're going to talk wagering today, as always, with our good pal, Matthew Freedman, but also a good friend of mine in the industry and also fantastic voice in it as well. You know him from Sports Grid. You know him from Wager Talk. Joe Raineri is joining us. You can follow him on Twitter at Joe Raineri because he's cool enough to have his own full name regularly as his Twitter handle. I am not. I had to add a number into mine. Joe, it is great to see you back again. Many a show during pandemic, after pandemic together over the years, talking baseball, talking football. But we've got a great game. It's been a fun ride to get here. Two number ones. Did that surprise you that we ended up getting here to that spot?
No. I think a lot of people, there were a lot of people thought Philadelphia would be the team, certainly out of the NFC East. Kansas City, you always got to pencil them in there somewhere at the top. But the schedule, and we'll talk more about it, for those Eagles, no team benefited more this year from not having the strongest schedule than the Eagles. So doesn't surprise me they landed the number one spot after all.
I like how you did that whole Eagles landing metaphor. You just slid that right in there. You're so good. You're so good. Now, look, guys, I don't want to stop the show before it starts, but I do have this here. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, this is the script. I have it here. Arian Foster sent this to me earlier for the Super Bowl, so I already know what's going to happen here in the game, Freedman. It's about 37 pages long. It's got some good stuff. It's going to be fun. Some really cool moments in here that they've crafted, but you can see it right here. Super Bowl, Eagles, and Kansas City Chiefs. So, Freedman, we're going to have to start writing this script here and writing this story regardless. Even though I know how the game's going to end, I want to hear what you guys have to say. So let's talk about it. It's a 1.5 point spread. The Eagles are favored right now. The over-under is at 50. The money line for the Kansas City Chiefs at plus 105. That's over at bettingpros.com. The narrative is, of course, we've got Andy Reid going against his old team. So there's fun stuff there. You got the Kelsey brothers. That's all fun and games. But what Joe was kind of alluding to is really interesting, which is the NFC AFC comparison. We've been building up the AFC. It's Mahomes, it's Josh Allen, it's Joe Burrow. It's the AFC is the gauntlet you have to run through. And the NFC is a place where, the 8 and 9 Bucks are hosting a home playoff game. And, Brock Purdy is the quarterback of the 49ers. So is it dangerous that we get this false sense of security? Like, wow, the Eagles were great, but they were great against the NFC. Is that a dangerous way to be looking at this game?
Maybe. They were great against inferior opponents, but they smashed them. And that is what, good to great teams do against inferior opponents. So you can't belittle the Eagles all that much for their strength of schedule. They took care of business in a very convincing fashion. But that said, I think this is wrong. This line is wrong of 1.5. I think the wrong team is favored here. Think about how we viewed these teams before the playoffs started. Most people would have had the Chiefs, if not power rated as the number one team, a top 2 team, easily above the Eagles. And I think what we've seen in the playoffs probably shouldn't change the perspectives that we had entering the playoffs, because the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes injured in their first game, and so it's that doesn't really, it's not representative of who they are. And then this past game, Patrick Mahomes still dealing with injury, Travis Kelce dealing with a back injury, all of the wide receivers being injured in the middle of the game. Like, that's not really representative of the Chiefs either. And then on the flip side, look at the Eagles. Yeah, they really handily took it to a Giants team that kind of overperforming for the super majority of the season.
Very kind of way of putting it. I like what you did there.
Yeah.
You really measured your words there on the Giants.
And then a 49ers team that at one point was rolling out a 4th string quarterback and then a 3rd string quarterback who was coming in on an emergency basis, who was unable to throw. Like, you beat them well, but you should beat them by like 30 points. So my perception of these two teams hasn't really changed. I think the Chiefs should be favored in this spot.
All right, so you coming hot right out of the gate here. He's just saying the wrong team's favored. Joe, do you kind of agree? And if so, does that push you immediately to be putting money on the Chiefs money line as opposed to even worrying about these numbers?
No, I could not disagree more. You should go out and put as much money as you have on Philadelphia. Just keep betting Philadelphia. The right team is favorite. Yeah. So
See, for those watching on the YouTube and not listening, it's sarcasm. You can see there's a lot of air quoting and silent gesturing going on here. It's all clean, but it's still it's a little silent. So Joe, talk to me, baby.
I'm with it. I'm with it. I thought it would come out of Pick'em originally, and I thought there was going to be some adjustment based upon obviously the high ankle sprain. People got thrown for a loop in the Cincinnati game when they learned all of a sudden, what do you mean Travis Kelce is questionable? It's a game time decision. What are you talking about? Back issues? What back issues? So listen, every team has got issues. Every team is hurt. Every team is banged up by this time of year. The two left standing, and Philadelphia should be, for the most part, healthier, given the fact, and I hate to keep going back to it, Joe, but the reality is we're talking about the 31st toughest schedule in the NFL, going up against, the Kansas City Chiefs, who have had to go through. Just look at the last month of the season on what they've had to go through, who they've had to go through in order to be able to get to this spot. The list of quarterbacks that Philadelphia has had to go up against versus Patrick Mahomes. I mean, it's night and day. I mean, Brock Purdy, Josh Johnson, some dude from Section 305 had to come in because they ran out of quarterbacks. I mean, Danny Dimes twice. I mean, you go down the list. This is an absolute step up in class just from the quarterback position alone. Now you mix in, of course, Andy Reid, the experience. Team has been there, done that. This is, to me, all things being equal, even if you think these teams are on equal footing, that the Eagles are every bit as good than the Kansas City Chiefs. Okay, so experience doesn't come into the handicapping. The Patrick Mahomes is your quarterback. And by the way, none of those quarterbacks that Philadelphia faced, this 85 Bears, apparently everyone has this Eagles team compared to here. When they talk defense for the Eagles, it's like, this team. Eric, settle down. They didn't go up against one mobile quarterback worth his weight. This is a totally different animal that they're facing here. So on many levels, I agree, Matt. To me, it was absolutely going to be Kansas City, regardless of the number. But the fact that twos are still out there, 2.5s are still out there, it's only one way to look for me. And I'm going with the better quarterback, the more experienced head coach. Oh, yeah, and guys that have been there, done that in that winning organization known as the Kansas City Chiefs.
And I'd like to follow up to his point about the defense there of the Eagles. And yes, it is a good defense, especially on the defensive line. They can get after the quarterback, right? So, and a good secondary, fully healthy now that Avonte Maddox is back in the slot. So it is a good defense. There's no trying to undermine that. However, like that said, they did not.
There's always a but.
They did not perform really all that well against the toughest teams that they played. The best offenses that they played against, they weren't all that great. Going against the Lions in week 1, they allowed 35 points per game. And that was before the Lions really kind of took it to the next level in the second half of the season. Jacksonville, playing against Jacksonville, the Jags put up 21 points, which isn't that much, but that's before the Jags really started to come on in the second half of the season. Going against the Cowboys in week 16, they allowed, 40 points? Going against the Packers in week 12, before Aaron Rodgers got injured, they allowed 20 points in the first half. They are good, but when they went up against the best offenses they faced, they weren't looking like an elite unit. They were looking like a good defense. And Patrick Mahomes, when he played good defenses this year, he crushed them. So I feel like the defense, it is the sticking point, and I think that is one of the big reasons why people do prefer the Eagles, or like the people who have bet on the Eagles, the reason why they are betting on them. But I don't think the defense is as strong as the overall numbers would indicate.
I agree.
Well, it's very interesting because we've got time before the game here. This is the early Super Bowl preview, by the way. Just putting this out there for everybody. So there'll be more Super Bowl preview. I mean, I'm going on Sports Grid tomorrow to talk about the Super Bowl. Joe, I'm sure you're going to talk about this for the next 10 days ad nauseum, and we all get sick of it. I guess the question at this point is this: as all of these very bright people talk about this game, if many of them have the same take you guys do, does that mean we're going to see line movement here? Is this going to move significantly, Joe, either all the way to Kansas City because it is so close already? So is the value on Kansas City now in the market if you want to bet them, as opposed to waiting for this game and betting it a week from now?
Absolutely, it is. And here's why. I think the minute that we start to get, and we did see this even with the Cincinnati line, right? The questions about the high ankle sprain. Everyone was waiting until Wednesday or Thursday. Can somebody please see what he's doing at practice, Mahomes? Is he mobile? Is he not mobile? And then once the information started to come out that Mahomes was going to be, he was fine, guys. There was nothing going to be wrong. Then you started to see the market turn, right? So all of a sudden from Kansas, Cincinnati being the big favorite, we started to see all of a sudden that money swing the other way to KC. And I think the same thing is going to happen here. The minute we start to get any sort of reports regarding any limited ability by Mahomes or non-limited ability, Kelsey here, what about all those receivers that were hurt? I think once that news starts to trickle in as we get a little bit closer to next week, I think this line might, go from 2 to 1.5 for Philadelphia to 1. I only see this thing moving towards KC. I don't ever think it's going to get to 3. I don't think the books are crazy enough to leave a field goal out there. I do think that this line is going to only move towards Kansas City as information comes in about the health and availability of those guys like Kelsey and Mahomes and the receivers. And if it's not, if the information coming out as we get closer isn't great, well, then you could see this thing hit up to 2.5 for Philadelphia, maybe 3, but one way or another, it will not last on the market if it does happen to get to a field goal. But I think that have to be a pretty damning report hitting the marketplace about Mahomes in Kansas City.
You mentioned something earlier, Joe, that kind of stuck with me. And I lived in Philadelphia for a while. I went to school there, college there, and then I lived a couple of years later. It's a unique place, I always say. I saw a lot more David Akers jerseys there than I did Donovan McNabb jerseys. It's a weird place. That being said, when you're talking about Andy Reid, I remember Andy Reid being, the guy who was hung with the moniker of great coach, can't win the big one until he did. And he did win the big one. So you were talking about the experience of Andy Reid, but if you look back at the track record of Andy Reid, yes, he's had a lot of success, but except for one time, he's always been the bridesmaid. Is there something dangerous potentially about this Eagles team that is kind of looking at, hey, we're fresh in this situation? I know some of the data will point to, teams that have been to Super Bowls kind of get it. They have, you don't get intimidated by the 2 weeks of media and all the superfluous things that happen, because there's a lot of stuff people forget. These 2 weeks leading up to the game, there's just so much other nonsense that's not football related. Sometimes that sucks up some other teams. Do you think that is an advantage or a disadvantage for this Eagles team going in?
I think it's a disadvantage. I mean, I think it's a business as usual trip for Kansas City, and they've earned that, right? Haven't they? And when I'm talking about experience, I mean that coach quarterback bond that they have. They've been through the trenches. They've been through the war there. Enemy off. I mean, stability is the number one thing we all look for in sports, right? Especially football. Do I have the OC? Do I have the head coach? Do I have the same quarterback? And when you do, and once you've made it past that first one and you got that, well, then the rest is just, Kansas City expected to be here this year. Make no mistake about it. Philadelphia, yeah, we expect to be a Super Bowl. Yeah, but I mean, it's until you have done it, until you've crossed that threshold, and now you get there and it's the lights and it's all week long. You're doing interviews, and Radio Row is an absolute disaster. They're all over the place. So many distractions other than the game. That to me is where experience is going to come into play. Been there, done that. We know what we've got to do. We know what we got to do in order to be able to win this thing. They're going to go out like a business trip here. There may be some wide eyes on the Eagles.
Well, could you say that same thing back in 2000, what was it, a couple years ago with the Eagles and the Patriots, too, about, this is a team with Doug Peterson. They've never been there before. The Patriots, they're always there. Business as usual. So it can go the other way. Just throwing the wrinkles in. I'm having fun here. I've got to find something.
You're right. I'm with you.
On the other side.
Anything is possible, but there's a lot more questions with this Eagles team when they are backed into a corner. I mean, you tell me, when have they been pushed to the brink here and have actually come through on anything?
Well, not when Jalen Hurts is playing quarterback. That's for sure. I mean, they certainly, we took Hurts out of the equation. It looked like a totally different team. They got their doors blown off there by Dallas on Christmas weekend. So it's about Jalen Hurts. Even though they're favored, do you think that, forget Vegas for a second here, Freedman. Do you think that the Eagles have a narrative that they are the underdog here in this game because they haven't been there? Do you think that is a driving force that they're using right now? Because I'm sure public perception of this game is, it's Patrick Mahomes, it's the Kansas City Chiefs, they're the industry standard. So do you think the Eagles are using that as a little bulletin board material here in this game as they prepare for it these next few weeks?
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, and I imagine that they view themselves as the underdog and they want to view themselves as the underdog. I think they would be shocked if they learned that they were favored in this game. And it might be like we should not be. It's like, it would be like this dual mind meld of one, yes, we should be favored. We're the better team. But then also no, we should not be favored.
Right.
Because
we need the motivation.
Right. So, who knows how it is that they're thinking of this, but to Joe's point about, Andy Reid and the experience that he has and Patrick Mahomes there, this is a legacy defining opportunity that they have. Patrick Mahomes, if he wins this Super Bowl, and let's just assume he's going to be MVP of the NFL this year, I think that's very close to being a certainty. He could retire the moment after the Super Bowl and be a first ballot Hall of Famer, some Sandy Koufax type of stuff, to where it's you had this much of a career, but it was all awesome. And Andy Reid, if he wins his second Super Bowl against the team that ditched him a decade ago, he's first ballot coach at that point, So
I think he's, Andy Reid should be a Hall of Fame coach anyway. I always felt like that, but you're right. Winning two puts you in that other conversation of all-time greats. And when you look at the body of work, the winning percentage, the playoff victories, Super Bowl appearances now with another one under his belt, that's pretty impressive. I mean, I know he lost a lot of championship games in Philadelphia, but he did get to them. That's still an accomplishment, especially back in those days when the NFC was a bit better, a lot more talent running through there. That was the greatest show on turf era and some other pretty good offensive running around the NFC. Let's talk about the over-under for a second. The number is at 50 right now. Now, I understand, different spots, it's fluctuating, but in your opinion, guys, 50.5, Freedman, we'll start with you on this one. Are you over or under on this number? And do you think it's going to move? Because mostly everywhere I see right now, as of today, it's looking at 50.5.
I think it's going to hover around the 49.5 to 50. Maybe it gets to 51. I really doubt it gets as high as 52, but I have it projected at 51.6. So I lean a little more towards the over, but I feel more strongly about the Chiefs side on this than I do about the over. And the same perspective that puts me on the Chiefs is what is putting me on the over here. I think the Chiefs score a lot of points, and I think that is what pushes this game to the over. If it's an under situation, normally unders and underdogs correlate, but I think if it's an under situation, it's because that defense for the Eagles is absolutely legit and shuts down the Chiefs, or at least slows them down enough to where it's a tightly contested, low-scoring game, and we don't get anywhere close to the total.
Hurts has averaged 50.7 rushing yards per game this season. The most ever in a Super Bowl was 64 yards by Steve McNair, a pretty darn good quarterback in his own right. Can Jalen Hurts run around enough, create enough here, Joe, in your opinion, to go over here in the 50.5?
My initial thought was, and the market move, the initial after it opened was under. It has obviously, climbed a little bit back up to right around that 50 mark. And I think the biggest move with this from a total is going to come late. I think a lot of people are just going to sit back. They're going to wait until before kickoff there to try and get as much information as possible. And then, like we saw it with the Kansas City and Cincinnati game too. There was a ton of money that came in late in that one to the under. And a lot of people thought that was going to be a shootout. I didn't. I thought it was going to be a very, points were going to be tough. It was going to be a grind. I think everyone expects this one to be a shootout. I think it might tick up a little bit more, Joe. But to me, you talk about Jalen Hurts. How healthy is he? Does anybody really have do you really want to swing him around on some sort of quarterback keeper and have him get crushed? And we're going to test.
Pretty healthy in the Giants game. I know they babied him in the second half because they obviously didn't have to do anything because that game was well out of pocket. And, last week, I don't think he got the full indication of full Jalen Hurts because he didn't have to get pushed either. So it's a fair question. Mm-hmm. But then we'll put the Super Bowl at 4 weeks removed from, or 5 from the initial injury, right?
Right.
That's a pretty good distance there. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, we're dealing with 2 quarterbacks that have injury questions, quote unquote, that we're trying to figure out there. And, whoever
the shoulder is different, though, isn't it?
Sure, absolutely.
A throwing shoulder is...
But the back foot of a quarterback is everything. But the thing with Mahomes is he is such a freak of nature. The way he throws the football is not like anybody else. He has such arm strength and such odd arm angles. He can flip a ball backwards, for God's sake. He does things like no human being should do with a football. It's crazy. It's insane. So, yeah, I mean, if this was Kirk Cousins, I'd say, yeah, the back foot really matters. With Mahomes, I don't know at this point. The weakness in the ankle is what concerns me. And you saw him tweak it there at the end of the game. And that was what worried me the entire time about that game. If that happens again early in this game, that will change the calculus, I think, completely of what goes on here, whether it be the over-under, whether it be the Chiefs to win this game, regardless. I know we got a lot of Super Bowl stuff to get to, but the one of the things you mentioned already is the MVP, right? It's foregone conclusion. It's always a quarterback. 9 of the last 13 players, 69% of them named Super Bowl MVP have been quarterbacks, 31 of 56, in case you're keeping score at home. And look, Mahomes is at plus 120 in some spots. You're getting Jalen Hurts at plus 100. Travis Kelce plus 1,000. Friedman, do we live in a world here where if Kelce is the guy that has the 2 touchdowns, does it go to Kelce at all? Or you think it would have to be a Travis Kelce 3 touchdown, 120-yard game for him to even get in the conversation? Because again, those stats are all attached to Mahomes at the same time. Would have to be all of him going in the offense, because I think that one thing of the defense of the Eagles you could talk about, good up front, good in the secondary, the linebacking core, that's the one thing they had to address in the offseason. They sort of did, kind of, but it's that one weakness of them, and that's where Kelce shines.
Yeah, I think the bet is Mahomes at, I would line shop, plus 130 is available, I believe, at DraftKings. You can look at other places and shop around. And I think if you like the Chiefs, that is probably the bet that you make instead of taking them on the money line or taking the spread, because I think it's pretty unlikely that they win this game and Mahomes is not the MVP. Even if Kelce has a great game, as you said, those stats are still attached to Mahomes. It would need to be sort of like a Julian Edelman type of situation where he has like the majority of the yards that Mahomes end up throwing.
Big yard after catch, or he breaks just a huge one after like a 5-yard pass and he goes 70. That kind of thing. Joe, do you see the market the same way, where again it's just foregone conclusion with the quarterbacks and any other bet is silly? Or do you think Kelce is kind of a fun one to at least throw out there with maybe throw a little tiny number on there just for fun?
So, I mean, it's the obvious choice, right? So keep it simple. If you're betting Kansas City, you better be betting Mahomes. It's got to be correlated here, guys. Although the one caveat I would reach out to is say, if Kansas City does win it and the defense is a big part of it, then I don't know what the number is, but, having Chris Jones in that middle with 2 or 3 sacks, I mean, you could have the defense take over this game with the number 3 offense, right? This Philadelphia offense supposed to light everybody up. Well, what if they don't light them up? And what if it's a long day for Hurts? It might be worth the price. A little sprinkle there on maybe somebody on the defense getting it done.
The
You know,
Eagles and
here's-
the Chiefs ranked 1 and 2, by the way, in the regular season in sacks. Philly having 70,
Yeah.
Kansas City 55. So in terms of the possibility of that, maybe it's not as crazy as it sounds. Go ahead, Freedman.
Yeah, here's one idea that is correlated with what Joe just mentioned there. If you think it turns into a defensive matchup, this would be very wild. I mean, Harrison Butker, 250 to 1. You know, like what if we're in a situation where it is a tight game, it's a low scoring game, Butker has like 3 or 4 field goals and one of them is a game winner. You know, like maybe a situation. Is it likely? No, but that's why it's 250 to 1.
If the number flips here and the Chiefs become the favorites in the next few days, does the money go minus on Mahomes, Freedman, for MVP? And you miss that window?
Ooh, I don't think so. Look at Jalen Hurts right now. He's plus 120. I think it would be similar type of odds on Mahomes. It would be, maybe 110, 115, 120, same neighborhood.
All right, now we've got so many props, so many other things to talk about. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the Betting Pros YouTube channel, youtube.com/bettingpros. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your pods too, Betting Pros. And we're going to have more coverage on that in the days ahead. But for now, we're going to put the early look preview to bed. Again, follow my good friend Joe Raineri over on Twitter at Joe Raineri. Go check out his work at Wager Talk. It's fantastic. My homie at Sports Grid. I love you, Joe. I'm glad you got your internet back. Very happy for you. Though I know you have to get to work now, so maybe not as happy as I should be. That'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Joe and Matt, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.